When you see a brand new car, what you're really seeing is just the finished product, right? It's sleek, it's powerful, it's ready to go. But underneath that shiny exterior, there's a story of just mind-boggling complexity. A global assembly line so intricate, so interconnected, that a single tiny tremor thousands of miles away can bring the whole thing to a screeching halt. So let's dive into this and see just how fragile that system really is. Our whole story really starts not with some huge explosion, but with a single spark. And it's the perfect example of how one seemingly small, totally localized event can send these massive shockwaves through an entire global industry.
So this headline from Automotive News, this is our starting point. Look, a factory fire is news, sure, but it's not usually this big of a deal. The part that should really jump out at you is disrupt business for months. That's not just a little setback. That's a huge red flag that points to a much, much deeper problem.
And that, of course, leads us to the big question we're tackling here. It sounds kind of impossible, doesn't it? How on earth can a fire at one factory put a behemoth like Ford, and by extension the whole auto industry, on its back foot for months? Well, the answer really peels back the curtain on the hidden vulnerability of modern manufacturing. Okay, so let's just quickly break down the key details. The company, Novelis, isn't just some random supplier. They are the world's largest aluminum recycler. So this wasn't a fire at a tiny parts shop. It was at an absolutely critical junction in the entire global automotive supply chain. And the impact? Not a short delay, but a disruption that's going to last for months. So to really get why this one fire matters so much, we have to look at the chain reaction it kicks off. It's really a classic domino effect, where you push over that first tiny piece and it just causes this whole cascade of failures all the way down the line. Let's trace that path. And that path, that's what we call the supply chain. It's this whole massive complex web that gets a product from a raw material all the way to you, the customer. Now, modern supply chains are honestly miracles of efficiency. They're designed to get parts exactly where they need to be at the exact moment they're needed. But, and this is a big but, that incredible efficiency comes at a cost. It creates a hidden fragility. And this just perfectly illustrates the whole process. Think about something as simple as a car door. It all starts as recycled aluminum from a supplier like Novelis. That's step one. Now, if that step gets disrupted, let's say by a fire, then step two, making the door panel, just can't happen. And that means step three, the assembly line, has to stop. And if cars aren't being built, they can't get to the dealership, and you can't buy one. The entire chain is broken at its very first link. Now look, if this fire at Novelis was just a one-off, a freak accident, it would be a problem, sure, but a manageable one. The real story, the one that the source material points to, is that this is not an isolated event. It's actually part of a much bigger and, frankly, more worrying pattern. And this is where the bigger picture just snaps into focus. Okay, so the Novelis fire was a physical threat. But look what else was going on. A massive cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover, that's a digital threat. A really important supplier goes bankrupt, that's a financial threat. A sudden change in government policy hits Tesla, a regulatory threat. The big takeaway here is that the assembly line isn't just vulnerable to one type of problem. It's facing this constant barrage of threats from completely different directions, all at the same time. And this is what that reality looks like. The threats are coming from everywhere. It's not just one thing you have to worry about anymore. It could be a fire in a factory, a hacker in another country, a bank failure halfway across the world, a new law. Any single one of these can bring the entire system to its knees. This represents a huge shift in how we have to think about this stuff. For decades, a supply chain disruption was seen as this super rare black swan kind of event, something you just couldn't plan for. But the reality now? Disruptions are constant. They've actually become a predictable, almost baked-in feature of doing business in the 21st century. So what does this all mean? What's the big takeaway here? What does this new normal of constant disruption actually mean for the products we rely on every day, like our cars, and for the whole economy? Here it is. This is the single most important idea to take away from all this. Disruption is no longer a bug in the system, it is the system. This incredibly complex, hyper-efficient, just-in-time global network that we've built is, by its very nature, incredibly vulnerable. Its greatest strength, all that efficiency, is also its greatest weakness. And I want to be clear, this is not some theoretical problem. The cost is very real and it's huge. Just take this number, 6. That's the number of weeks, 6 weeks, that a single cyber attack shut down Jaguar Land Rover. Think about that.
6 weeks of no production, no sales, no progress. That's the real, tangible consequence of this fragility we've built into the system. And that brings us to our final thought. We've been using the auto industry as our case study today. But this whole dynamic of hyper-efficiency creating hyper-fragility, it applies pretty much everywhere. So the question I want to leave you with is this. If the system that builds our cars is this vulnerable to a single spark, what other critical systems in our lives are just as fragile?